Hello and welcome to this unofficial audio commentary for Jordan Peele's magnificent film Get Out. And my name is Omar Moore. I have a cold and I hope you can bear with me for the next hour and 44 minutes. I will do my best to sound like I'm making sense to you. What makes sense to me is this really great horror film that made history, becoming the highest grossing film ever from a first time African American writer director. So congratulations to Jordan Peele and the cast. We'll talk a lot about the themes of this movie. There's so many things going on in it. There could be enough for 3 or 4 separate audio commentaries, and we've already seen here this long shot here, and out of the right hand side of the frame comes this one silhouetted figure, and then we get to see him in the light, and we see that he's an African American, or he's a black man at least, and then we hear his accent, so he's an African American man, and it turns out to be Lakeith Stanfield, the actor who was also in such films as Selma. And he's here by himself in a neighborhood that we don't know anything about. We have no idea where he is. He has no idea where he is. In this film, one of the themes that reoccurs is isolation and loneliness, and specifically isolation and isolation for black men and black women. And then in the horror movie tradition, we think, oh my gosh, this lone guy, particularly the idea of the racist stereotype, this lone guy, this lone black guy in particular, walking through a neighborhood, he must be no good, up to no good, which is what a lot of people may well be thinking as they watch the scene. And then the way the camera does a reveal, and then the focus is not the man, but is the white car. And this idea of the white knight car now becomes the villain in the piece, and of course that turns the whole movie structure of Hollywood on its head. You know, the this knight in shining armor, and in fact we will see very soon that the person to be afraid of is very clearly the person that comes out of this car. And this knight in shining armor, who wears what looks like a knight's costume, we can't quite see it here, but has a knight's looking helmet on, and he is now putting a sleeper hold on Lakeith Stanfield, and you can notice that chokehold he puts on him, rendering him unconscious. When I first saw this film, I thought he had actually killed the character in the film. Turns out that he doesn't, as we'll find out later. He has now kidnapped Lakeith Stanfield, and this is eerily similar to Trayvon Martin. Those of you who follow the news, although Trayvon Martin was not kidnapped, he was murdered on the spot in a neighborhood that he was familiar with, even though he didn't live there. He was visiting his dad, I believe, and he was killed in 2012 by George Zimmerman, who got away with murder, literally. So now we see the beginning of the opening credits, and we've already heard some warnings. If you listen to the audio, you will hear warnings. The first was from a 1930s song, Run Rabbit Run, an old English song. He'll get by without his rabbit pie, so run rabbit run, rabbit run, run run. It's a warning, and it's this association with animals, this idea that in this film that black men in particular are the prey, and they are trying to escape the clutches, in this case, of a group of white terrorists, white murderers. And that's the dynamic in which this film plays, subtly and very blatantly. The second warning is the Swahili tune that you're probably hearing right now if you turn up your audio track, which is the warning song as well, an African warning song about getting out and being careful. And then now You see these collections of photos, a more updated song from Childish Gambino from 2016, in fact. Donald Glover, the man behind Childish Gambino, with a song called Redbone. And that song, its refrain is to stay woke, which is, of course, a more updated edition for millennials and people who are familiar with what the term stay woke means. Be aware, be awake, and stay alive. And so that's another warning. And I love the fact that there is this intergenerational set of warnings applying to Chris. And it's as if it's an echo from the ancient past and ancestral past, coming up into the early 20th century and now into the 21st century. And I like the idea of those oral intonations. We see the man shaving there. That's Chris, Daniel Kaluuya, who plays the man who is going to be facing a lot of incredibly terroristic situations and atmospheres over the next hour and 44 minutes. And the woman we see here is Rose, played by, notice the way she knocks her head on the door there. Rose, played by Allison Williams. She is the woman who will lead her boyfriend that she's kissing right there to the mansion of her parents, where all of these very strange things are going to be taking place. Chris is a photographer, as we've seen some of these photos. And again, the animal references we see here. Rose holding up Chris's dog here. And we see on the wall a picture of a bird in the background in Chris's apartment. Chris, as you can see there's the bird. And there's all this reference to animals and dogs. You see a dog there on the wall as well. So this is about animals, about where human beings and animals reside together, and particularly where black men and animals reside together in America. That's always been a very uncomfortable and very historical coexistence, as you look at the history of the way dogs were used on black people, black men and women, during the civil rights era in the 1950s and 60s. And the way that black people were viewed as less than animals, were viewed as 3/5 of a human being in the United States Constitution. So there's this, again, this element of animals and prey. And where does Chris end up in all of that and his situational relationship with those animals? I find that to be fascinating. And you'll see even later on some empathetic connection between Chris and animals, and I'll point that out. Here, Rose has been lying to her boyfriend, Chris, declaring that he is the first black man that she's dated. We will find out, of course, as will Chris later on, that that's absolutely not true. Look at this blending of this car with the trees in the woods here in this forest. And we've already seen transportation of a black man in this film. And of course, that was at the very beginning of the film, where a hooded figure in a knight's helmet had sleeper-held Lakeith Stanfield and put him in a car and transported him to somewhere. We don't know where. And that scene happened, of course, perhaps several months, even a year or two before what we're seeing now. And now we've seen Rose do the same, not sleeper holding him, but putting Chris in a car and driving him to what will be her parents' mansion. Interestingly, we will see Rose apply a sleeper hold, kind of the way she holds Chris's head when she's trying to comfort him, and it's awfully strange looking, and it's resembling the very arm lock and sleeper lock that Caleb Landry Jones, who actually plays Jeremy, her younger brother, Rose's younger brother, puts on Lakeith Stanfield early in the beginning of the movie. We have been looking at Rod, the TSA agent played by Lil Rel Howery, who is outstanding. I think he should be given a nomination for this from the Academy. And at the time I'm recording this, it is middle of 2017. So the Academy Award nominations for the 2017 year are still some 6 or 7 or 8 months off. And it remains to be seen if he will be nominated. By the time you hear this commentary, you may already have found that out. I think he is excellent. Again, this connection with animals. We've now seen a deer, what looks like a deer, what we will find out is a deer, has come out of nowhere seemingly and smashed the side of Rose's vehicle here. This is a warning again. And this time it's a warning from an animal. Or is it something even more sinister? Because what I am seeing here is an incredible, connectivity between animals and human beings. And again, we see this animal kingdom, this prey being catapulted from someone or somewhere. And Chris is looking to make a connection here. And you see the empathy. He's being drawn in. And as you can see, he's photographed animals before, but he doesn't take his camera out here. He's looking at this deer, and it's not quite dead yet. It's clearly severely wounded, and it's probably on its very last legs. This image has really affected Chris, as we can see, and it's interesting that in the background there, the white police officer is saying, "Next time call animal control." And to me, that's a veiled reference, not only to the deer, but also to Chris, because of course in American lexicon, black people have, in a very racist way, been equated again by the larger white society to animals, and have been animalized in American culture throughout the centuries. What we see here is something that black men and black women go through on a daily basis in the United States. Whether they are driving a car or not, they are asked by police to show their ID. And what Rose does here is assert her own white privilege in a positive way to help her boyfriend. And Chris obviously appreciates that his girlfriend's doing this. And I think this is something that white people in general need to do when these kinds of things happen, is to assert their white privilege to head off any kind of situation. And Rose does the right thing there. And we see the groundskeeper and the way the camera, and the first of a few of these shots of the camera slowing down, and we notice all isn't quite right with the way the housekeeper there has been waving and welcoming Chris. Now this shot is a good one because we see what looks like a master shot, but I call it a trick shot of sorts, because you think this is really where the shot will end and it's going to stay there. But watch slowly now as the camera will pull back to reveal someone watching what's going on. You think that we're the ones who are watching, but watch this slow pull out. And Toby Oliver's the cinematographer. And we pull back and reveal that same groundskeeper figure. And he's really watching what's going on. So we are looking really through his perspective, not our own. At least we have two perspectives. First ours, but really it's really his. Which adds another element, another layer to this, and it's again a figure, another black man as an outsider here, watching from afar, and there's this theme of black men as outsiders, not just out as outsiders to these very unusual surroundings and these very sinister atmospheres in this movie with this white family, but also metaphorically as outsiders to the United States of America. The black men and black women have never truly been welcomed and embraced in America by white Americans in particular. And I think that Jordan Peele plays on this theme very intelligently. Notice that Rose's parents, played by Bradley Whitford, and Bradley Whitford, by the way, looks very much like Spencer Tracy looked in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and I don't think that that was an accident, that Jordan Peele had him look like that, with the same glasses and the white hair and that kind of close cropped haircut. And if you look at Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, that's exactly how Spencer Tracy looked, and Spencer Tracy, albeit, was ill during the filming of that movie. And by the way, Catherine Keener plays Rose's mother, Missy. Bradley Whitford is Rose's father, Dean. And both of them are wearing dark clothing, and I thought that was very interesting. That they're welcoming a black man into their house, and they're both wearing dark clothing. And I don't know, is it funereal, or is it their own statement about Chris and how they feel about him, or is it their contempt for him through their clothing? I don't know, because this family that plays that it's so nice and ingratiating, overly so, are actually anything but, and we will see that, this liberalism. And of course we know that people who are liberal, white people who are liberal, are racist or can be racist, and there's no ideology that has, or no party affiliation that has a sole coverage of being racist. Racism covers and transcends any sense of ideology or party. And we see these deer in the background again, and lots of people who were not eagle-eyed or not aware will not have noticed these deer. You see that right there again behind Chris, the deer. And of course, that also is a reference to the deer that we've already seen that's mortally wounded. And again, this animal association that goes on. And we see the housekeeper there, played by Betty Gabriel, Georgina. She also isn't quite what she seems. Again, we see that the groundskeeper isn't quite what he seems. That's Marcus Henderson, who is Walter in this movie. All the banter that's taken place in the last couple of minutes while I've been talking between Dean and Chris, and where Dean's showing Chris around, he's talking about some of the things that have happened in the household, and these clues that are very blatant once you've watched the film. We keep a piece of our mother here in the kitchen, and there's this lot of black mold down there in the basement. I mean, all these things are so explicit once you've seen the movie, especially if you've seen it more than once. And I've seen it several times when it was in theaters in 2017, and it's amazing how you pick up new things every time. And that's the greatness of a movie like this. You can do that. True art helps you see multiple perspectives. And you see all the space, and you see Bradley Whitford is telling Daniel Kaluuya about acres of space. And this is really another world. This is not just a mansion, but this is another world that Chris has been taken to. And it seems as if he's trying to seek entry into it. And his camera is a way of seeking entry into that world. But he's still very much an outsider to it. And Jordan Peele shows us that through Toby Oliver's cinematography, and also the way he positions Chris in the frame a lot of times. We see that the questioning becomes a bit more sinister, and this Guess Who's Coming to Dinner type thing has now become a bit more of an inquisition. And look at the way Catherine Keener here, I call it a light seduction of Chris. She's assessing him. She's doing, I think, a psychological profile of him. She's a psychiatrist and hypnotist. And look at the way look at these looks that she gives. Keener she's one of the top actors. Keener, she is so good in films that are terrible and in films that are great like this one. And she says very little here, and she's just giving a smile and a look, and she forms the undercurrent while everybody else is talking, doing most of the talking. She's got the little looks and the glances, and it's great stuff. It's a great it's the undercurrent of what everybody else is saying, or the rest of the family is saying. And here's Georgina, and you're going to hear this audio track, this kind of voice, and you can't really make out what it is. And you see the slowing down here, and then the shaking of the hand as Georgina pours this iced tea. And look, boom, there's this audio, and all of a sudden, she's remembering something. And boom, she loses control. And look at Keener again. And boom, snaps back. Georgina snaps back to this role. And then Bradley Whitford there is Dean. And look at the look that Allison Williams gives. Wow. I mean, people miss that also. That look that she gives right there. It's very telling. And I didn't even notice it until a few times after I'd seen it on another number of occasions that she had done this. And again, you see this deer. And there you see Caleb Landry Jones, who is Jeremy in this movie. Jeremy is the one who many viewers won't realize it, but then later on will put two and two together, that he is the one who applied the sleeper hold to Lakeith Stanfield, the actor, at the beginning of the movie. And he has now joined the party. And here's a third interaction between Chris and the Armitages. And you see again, Dean has got the glasses on, and there's lights in his eyes, and it looks hazy. You've got Jeremy there, you've got Rose, you've got Missy, of course, Catherine Keener's character. And everybody is around the table. It seems harmless, but then look at the line of inquiry as Jeremy becomes a lot more malevolent and makes the events for Chris at this dinner table very uncomfortable. He speaks in terms of physicality and mentions beasts. And then you've got Rose talking about biting the tongue of a previous boyfriend. Now, we don't know who or what the race of her boyfriend is. And look at Chris, he's shocked at this. We don't know who this previous boyfriend was, but we do know that she did something very violent. And her defense is that, well, I wasn't expecting the tongue, the French kiss. I wasn't expecting it, so I reacted. Wow, look at this shot. Oh my God, that is a really powerful shot. There's the smile on Catherine Keener's face, and then behind her, Betty Gabriel is Georgina. Very serious look on her face, and very Stepford wife type look. And there's an homage in this film to the Stepford Wives, and also to various other films like The Shining, The People Under the Stairs, horror films that suggest not only the changes in human behavior and the shocking things that go beneath the veneer of that behavior, but also the idea of otherness and the idea of trying to understand that different environments create these extraordinary and supernatural and horrific results. And the canvas that people play on is often very different from the canvas they expect. And here we see again a very, very uncomfortable exchange. Really, it's not just an exchange, it's just one monologue by Jeremy. And he's got this grin on his face, but he's saying all these things about physicality and genetic makeup, which is, of course, not something that you'd expect from someone that you're meeting for the very first time, especially when it's someone you're meeting who happens to be the brother of the woman that you're dating. That's highly unusual. And obviously what we see here is a garden variety racist who is much more blatant. And in a way, Jeremy actually is doing Chris a favor. I hate to say that. I don't mean it to sound like that, but he at least is showing his true colors right away. Whereas the rest of this very crooked and very, terroristic white family is playing very nice to Chris. And we see the deer again in the background, another clue that we're on another playing field. And look at that. Again, Missy, Catherine Keener, wow. That look, that's the look. She's telling Jeremy to back off. And it's great acting. I thought that Catherine Keener was excellent. Because again, it's what she says without saying it. As Allison Williams, who, by the way, was in the HBO series Girls, for those of you who watch it, and actually was very good in that series. And that series has now come to an end, and I urge people to watch the last episode of it. It's quite an eye-opener for those of you who haven't watched it. But here, Allison Williams' character, Rose, is telling Chris, hey, can you believe this? She's vocalizing her outrage, or maybe even faux outrage about racism. And Chris is really not paying a lot of attention to it. He seems to be concerned about something else. But look at that poster, Def Cheetah versus Matter. And you see a photo, that's an artwork of a woman holding up a mask. Deaf Cheetah versus Matter, I guess it is. And again, this association with animals and matter. And I think that's about matter being the physicality, the human being, the corpus. And this animal, deaf cheetah versus matter. It's artwork that I think is connected to the film and to the atmosphere of this room that Rose is in with Chris. And I think it's Rose's bedroom. I would imagine it would have to be Rose's bedroom since it's her family's mansion. But I find that fascinating. And she lives, I guess, on this mansion. In this mansion. So I just find that artwork very revealing, because it shows us again another undercurrent and merger of human being and animal. And you see it again here with the stuffed animal there, the lion. And then we see it again here with this call from the forest and this buzzing sound. Maybe there's a bee coming from this dead carcass of this deer that Chris has looked at earlier in the film. And boom, he hits himself thinking that it's a bee from that's hitting him. And again, there's this connection between animals and human beings. And there again, that stuffed animal, that lion, and Chris sitting right there bedside looking at it. And he turns that, it looks like a lion, he turns it around. And I find that to be very interesting too. I love the way that Toby Oliver bathes Chris in this moonlight, this midnight blue, and it works with his dark complexion. I think it's something that you don't see a lot in cinematography. I think there are lots of complaints with cinematographers who don't light, and particularly white cinematographers who don't light black people properly. I think in this film, although sometimes we don't see Chris clearly, I do think it works for this film because of the genre, because of the way Chris is isolated, and we see him here almost invisible as he's walking through this corridor of places, and it is nighttime, so I think it's actually sensible. Again, Chris is trying to find his bearings, and look, there's all this space he's isolated again. And here we are looking at a black man in isolation. And he resorts to the habit of smoking, which he's been chastised for. And just as he's about to smoke, he sees a figure running right at him, another isolated figure. And we see, as he comes closer, it's a black man. It's the groundskeeper. And then he runs away. And it even looks like a different person running past, as we see. And then we see, again, a black woman in isolation this time at a window. And this reflection. And there we go. Again, boom, she's gone. So Chris, again, is observing from a distance. And he's observing what's going on in this household and what's going on around it. It is very bizarre. He's had enough. He's going back, and boom, he can't go back yet because Missy's been sitting in the dark. And you have to ask yourself, why would Missy be sitting in the dark? And that's also something that probably doesn't get a lot of thought, but she's been sitting in the dark. And yes, it's a horror movie, so these horror conventions are on the table here, and Jordan Peele uses them effectively. But even so, you'd have to ask yourself, why is Missy in the dark? And she is someone who has made it clear to everybody that she has a level of acumen that's very high, and she's very perceptive. She now begins to investigate Chris. And I call this an investigation by seduction. Now, I'm not talking seduction in a sexual way, but more psychological. I mean, every seduction does involve psychology. Now, this one is purely seduction through a emotional connection. And I love how Daniel here, his acting is great because he goes from someone who is very happy-go-lucky, it seems, to someone who now has to pause, and then the hypnosis of the cup and the spoon. And then he is no longer smiling, and he's starting to think about his childhood and his mother who passed away, and he blames himself, of course, for that. And watch Catherine Keener too. She lulls Dana Kaluuya, her on-screen acting partner here, to a place, a sunken place, as she will say. So there's this deception and seduction. She's got to make Chris feel comfortable to go to these places he doesn't want to go to. And in fact, earlier in the film, he said he doesn't really want to talk about it. But of course now we see that Missy has ignored that, and she's getting him to talk. But she's getting him to talk not to try to heal him or not to try to make him feel a bit better and to engage in any catharsis. It's about putting him in a place of servitude, if you will. And I think it's magnificently shown by Jordan Peele, this idea of being sunken. And I look at it as, you know, the 500-year head start that white America has over African Americans, over black people in America. And you see that represented in this very huge chasm that's done in such a beautifully artistic way. And you'll see in a few moments, you'll know instantly what I'm talking about. And Chris is looking up through this chasm, and he's looking at Missy, who's way, way high above in this kind of this rectangular, small television-like space. So there's this gulf between white people and black people. And I think that's a symbolic representation of the reality of where white people and black people are in America. Enslavement plays a huge role in that, obviously, and the remnants of slavery play an immense role in that. So this is no ordinary psychotherapist, psychologist, psychiatrist. This is someone who is punishing Chris. And we see that conclusively here. I think this is masterful how this is done. Chris has fallen so far. He may as well be in outer space, and that looks like the visual representation here. And as I've said, he has this chasm now he's fallen into. And I would say that it's a representative chasm of the distance between black people and white people in American society, and how far behind black people are as a result of the enslavement that they suffered at the hands of white colonials and rich white men and rich white male property owners, and the colonialism of many white European countries, and the enslavement of African people. And I think this is something that is going on here. Look at this touch in the meanwhile. It's a seductive touch, but it's also a cynical one that Catherine Keener lends there. And now he's woken up, and there's that poster again, Deaf Cheetah versus Matter. And again it's this reference to animals, and there you see the dog, Chris's dog, that's been texted to Chris by Rod, his buddy at the TSA. And then of course the juxtaposition there next to the stuffed stuffed bear, I guess, and it looks as if the bear has even been turned around a bit. Now Chris is beginning to see this connection, and he's now using his camera. He's got his Canon camera, and I'm a big Canon fan, and so he's a man after my own heart. I'm a person who loves to take pictures as well, and here's Chris doing just that, and he's now taking pictures of the forest. He's getting the architecture. He's trying to find his bearings here. Still very much isolated figure, and he's trying to find his bearings, and maybe this camera that he has, his photography can help him get closer to understanding what it is he is involved in here, because it's not sitting well with him, and we can see that in a very subtle way. And now he's using his camera to observe, and look at how he's observing through glass, observing through more glass with the window, and then Georgina is observing through a window, a mirror. So there's 3 layers of glass and 3 layers of seeing and observing, and we see that so well. And there's no direct looking there. It's Chris looking through a lens that's capturing a window, that captures Georgina in the window, that captures Georgina looking into a mirror. So there's no direct looking at a figure. It's all through glass. And again, it's another way of seeing and observing. And I love it. I love the way that Jordan Peele set that up, these layers of seeing, these layers of perspective, these layers of reflection. Then no one's looking directly at something, and I find that to be an astute cinematic choice. It's very weird, if I can say it properly, Rear Window like, with Jimmy Stewart, Hitchcockian, but it's also Jordan Peele has made it his own, because he provides these layers to provide a meaning about how isolated these figures are. Because although he tries to make this shot intimate with the mirror and the window and the camera, there's just so much more distance, because there's all these ways of looking and seeing that are being used rather than just directly looking at the mirror, at the window. I find that to be fascinating, and this isolation continues, and so that was a really prime example of it. And here, Walter, the groundskeeper, in a very odd exchange with Chris, and it's eerie because it's not a friendly exchange despite the smiles and grins from Walter, who's played by Marcus Henderson. This is an exchange that is more foreboding and cynical. And you can see it leaves a not a great taste in the mouth of Chris. And very strange reaction. Not a strange reaction, but a reaction that says that things are very strange. Look at that, Three Faces of Eve. Joanne Woodward. That's another homage there by Jordan Peele to another great film of the 1960s that was a horror / drama. And Rose takes that spot now. The Three Faces of Rose. And you can see again, behind Chris is an artwork that looks like a half human, half animal. Or is it a woman who's a ballet dancer? And again, it looks like Rose because it's got this long hair that looks brown, brunette type. And then we see the Deaf Cheetah versus Matter artwork there on the right hand side on the wall, that red artwork. See it there? Again, these are all these representations of the relationship between human beings and animals. And I love this exchange because Chris is trying to confide in Rose, and Rose is raising these questions about Chris and saying, well, really, could it be? And I don't know if Chris is feeling that he's being really heard and listened to by Rose. But there you have it. And there's this swift move by Rose to go elsewhere. And I find that interesting. Now, on the face, there seems to be nothing wrong at all with this sequence. I've got no problem with anyone welcoming people, these well-heeled white characters, and any black person doing that. But what does strike me as interesting from a class perspective is that you'd have a groundskeeper welcoming these guests, these rich guests in. Normally you would expect the owners of the house, Bradley Whitford and Catherine Keener, to be welcoming these guests. But you don't get that here, and that's another clue that things are really off. Not because a black man is introducing white people onto these grounds, but because on a class level it doesn't make sense. I mean, class consciousness is a big thing, as well as race consciousness in America is a big thing. And I just think in a mansion you would expect that the true owners, Bradley Whitford and Catherine Keener, would be doing the introduction, but they're not even in the picture. And look at the predatory behavior there from that woman, the white woman there, who is asking Chris about his sexual prowess to his face, and looking down at him, at his crotch. It's something that a lot of black men have experienced, as have I as a black man. I've experienced that with white women actually asking me these things on at least a couple of occasions, and in a public setting. And there's no relationship there. I mean, it's not as if there was a relationship going on. I mean, it was a complete stranger asking that of me. And I'm sure that a lot of men, but particularly a lot of black men especially, have faced that question. And black men have faced that kind of inquiry for centuries here. It's this racist sexual stereotype about black men, and it's perpetuated in that scene that you just saw. Again, we see the isolation. Look at all the space and the distance. And Chris is using his camera to effectuate closeness and intimacy. And what he's done is found who he believes is someone he can relate to. And that is Lakeith Stanfield, by the way. Looking very different than he did at the very beginning of this movie. Some people may not realize that that's the same person. And the movie makes it clear eventually to viewers who still may not be sure that this is in fact the same person, and we'll find that out later when Rod and Chris do the investigative work, and Rod in particular does that. Now Chris is really trying to put two and two together just when he thinks he's found someone he can confide in, one of the only other black people on the property besides the housekeeper and groundskeeper. He now sees that this person is not behaving in a way that he would expect. And look at this. Now, every white person knows that when you stick out a fist, they know to give a fist back. I mean, but this guy doesn't, as this black man, he doesn't know that. And he returns with the hand out, a palm. And that's just very unusual. And so is this. It's a very disrespectful thing too. This kind of turning around as if he's on auction. And speaking of auctions, we'll get to that. And I'll get to that in a moment. But just when he thinks he's got this closeness with somebody, he gets the distance from the black man that he's just seen. And now he's attempting to get closeness again, in a way. And he comes up to see Stephen Root, who plays a blind man. And I think this may be the, outside of the scenes with Rod, Lil Rel Howery, this may be the only other character I think that Chris achieves closeness with. And it's a great scene because I think Stephen Root's character, I think his name is Jim in the movie, I think is one of the most important characters, if not the most important character in the film. And he's giving this story out about his blindness and how he was this great art dealer and curator and all of this, collector and artist, etc., etc., and had these galleries, and Chris is listening to him. And I think for a moment here, Chris seems to feel a connection, because all throughout, as I said, isolation is one of the many themes in the movie, and how Chris is trying to get to be closer to some of the people, trying to understand the environment. And then he's still alone again, and then look at this. Very creepy Stepford wife type moment. He's really in a house of people who are very strange indeed. Now, in every scene, there's something that's just not adding up. Again, Chris's phone is disconnected, and again, that's another symbolic idea of a lack of connection. And he comes across very interesting juxtaposition here. Look at this. As he opens that door, he sees Georgina, and boom, jump cut, we see Rose. And I love the way that that happens, because there is a suggestion of something there. And I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's Rose who was going to do something. I don't know if Rose was going to speak to Georgina. I don't know. It's a moment that's very clever. And that cut like that jump cut to Rose, with no situational awareness of where Rose even is. Very smartly done by the director and by Toby Oliver. again, the constant juxtaposition between human beings and animals. There again, we see it with Rod and Chris's dog. We see it again there with Chris and the stuffed animal. It's constant and ever present in the frame. And this is the only connection Chris has, his best friend, Rod. And as you see, they are having a real talk about everything. I think this is the first time in the movie that Chris has been able to authentically tell someone how he feels beyond the moment that he has with Missy. This is the first time, I think, is the first time that he's been able to get real, so to speak, with someone he can connect to. Even his girlfriend Rose is someone he hasn't really fully connected with, because his attempt to connect has been met with this skepticism on her part. And now you've got some comic relief here, and Rod is telling Chris, "Oh, they've got you on display now, huh? You know, watch out you don't get made into a sex slave." You know, it's we are laughing at this, but it's not untoward, because these things happen. And one of the things about Get Out that's so effective, that again, that does lend itself to other horror movies from the genre, is the idea of that you go into a house in the suburbs, a means of escape, but yet what are you escaping to? You know, the idea of white flight. Where and what happens when white people escape and go to what they may call a safe haven from those, quote unquote, those people in the city. And what we see is that the people in these suburbs, as Bradley Whitford said early on, are crazier or just as messed up in the head as the people in the cities are. I'd say far worse than messed up in the head. I think they're far worse than people in the cities, because you've got all this dysfunction. What you see here is the juxtaposition of a woman on the artwork there who looks like Rose, and she looks very feral. And again, this is this connection between animals and human beings again. And the hair, it looks very feral looking. She's laying back, and it's an artwork, I believe, by Madison Leclerc, or Madison Leclerc, who actually worked on this film. You may be able to see it above, at the top there, the artwork. And then next to that piece of artwork is a poster that says Chris Crane, Disco is Deaf. When I first saw this film, I thought it said Chris is dead on there. And then you see Chris is juxtaposed right near that poster, and I thought it was a warning to Chris. But it's some great artwork there, which may or may not be connected. I think it's very interesting, though, the way it's placed there, and that woman that is there behind Chris in that artwork, very, very feral. And I think that is a connection, just like the Deaf Cheetah versus Matter artwork we saw. We've got Georgina here, played by Betty Gabriel, in a very powerful moment, haunting and powerful, and very creepy. And the way her eyes move here, and her face, oh my God, right into the camera. Oh, it's a great piece of acting. And then watch how she scuttles away like that. Very Stepford-like, not real. Chris is saying, well, you know, this bitch is crazy. You know, he's really beginning to see that all is not well here. And he's overwhelmed now. Now he's seeing all these people, these white people, and this Asian man as well. And I want to talk about that in a moment. And then Georgina at the back just kind of sauntered past him at the back there. He is out of his depth here, and he's isolated again. This Asian man that you see there has just asked Chris if he finds that there are any advantages of being an African American these days. And I think it's a great question, somewhat condescending question, or patronizing question, but I think it's a very important one. Because if you look at the history of Asians in America, it has not been a kind history to them. Whether we're looking at the early 1900s, and the Chinese building the railroads in America, and this treatment they suffered, and whether we're talking about Asians and the U.S. approach to them in the 1940s, 1930s and 40s, and then the internment of Japanese Americans in the United States under FDR, in response to what was going on in World War II and the Korean War and what happened in Southeast Asia rather, in Vietnam and everything. And now Asians in America have at least some Asians have a very strong showing and standing, economically, politically, and socially, and they have assimilated into white culture, white American culture, very well, and to the point where you find that a lot of Asians and white people marry each other. And I think it's strategic as well as economic and political. It's a very politically strategic thing. And so I think it's kind of fitting that someone of an immigrant class would be asking that question of a group who have been in America longer than his group ever has been. And I found that interesting. And while I've talked all over that, you saw a moment of Chris trying to achieve closeness, this time with his cell phone camera, the one that has been constantly disconnected. And he takes a picture here of the Keith Stanfield and freezes him and captures him in this moment where he comes to his senses, and that flashbulb sparked him. And he was warning Chris to get out. And I guess he got re-hypnotized and now is back to his old self. Chris is feeling very disillusioned at this point, more isolated than ever before. Look how lonely he is there, even though he's got all these people around him. And they all say that you can have 1 million people around you and you can be at your loneliest. And I think that's very true. Very true indeed. And throughout this movie, Chris is isolated. He's trying to seek closeness. He's trying to get a connection. And he doesn't get it, not even from Rose. And he's seeking it here. And I think this is maybe the last ditch attempt that Chris is achieving, trying to get a connection with his own girlfriend, who he says he's been with for 5 months. And now we see what Dean is really about. Here he's performing an enslavement auction. And this is what was part of what has happened in the United States over the years of history. And we're seeing that right now. We're going to see the juxtaposition and the montage and the intercutting between these two scenes. That the trap is being laid for Chris, and all these people are not just here, but they're here to do something that is going to be having a monumental impact on Chris, to say the least. And Rose is the one white person that I think Chris thinks he can trust now. The only one. And Allison Williams has to perform as the only benevolent person, because she's the only person that can be like this. And Catherine Keener too, but she has to do this, because otherwise if she lets up now, the plan to get Chris to where they want Chris to get to will be blown. The cover will be blown. So she has to remain as she is. And now we see that Chris is on the grill, literally. He is the menu, and we see it. And bingo. It looks like we have a winner here. And we have a winner in none other than the very person that we thought, or I thought, or you might have thought, or Chris might have thought was a potential ally. And that is this man, Stephen Root, who plays Jim, the blind man. So there you have it. And there he has it. He knows and she knows what's coming. And look at this shot of their backs to us. I love that shot because it seems as if the world is against the both of them, but the world is not against Rose. The world is turned against Chris, and that turning has gone to acceleration. And here's Chris trying to, again, express his feelings. And in Hollywood films, we don't often see black men authentically telling you how they feel. We've seen it earlier when Chris confided in Missy during the hypnotism. Now we're seeing it again here, confiding in his girlfriend. Look at Rose there. Watch her very closely. There's some clues there as she listens to him. And you see it in her expressions. And this is her first time on the big screen. I think Alison Williams did a great job here. Alison Williams also happens to be the daughter of the broadcaster, Brian Williams, the NBC news broadcaster. And look at that headlock. That is the same headlock, by the way, that Lakeith Stanfield had put on him by Caleb Landry Jones, Jeremy, who plays Rose's younger brother. And that's a clue for me that Rose is up to no good. And I don't know if many audience members noticed that headlock, but I did. I saw it, I think the second time I saw it, when I watched this movie the second time, I thought, wow. And I think, Chris, you are in danger, to borrow a line from the movie Ghost, Whoopi Goldberg's line. He's in deep doo-doo. And I think he kind of knows that there's something going on, even as he confides in Rose. But he'll find out soon enough that he is not long for this game. It's a very dangerous game, the most dangerous game, which of course is a horror movie from the 1930s, a very powerful one. I urge you to watch The Most Dangerous Game. It's a terrifying movie, horror movie from the 1930s, and it's very effective. It's a very influential horror movie, and I think it also is a big influence on Get Out as well. Oh, this camera slows down again here. The second or third time we've seen this slowing down. This idea that things are very sinister, and oh, look at the smiling faces in the night, and the housekeeper and the groundskeeper. Ooh, look at this. Oh, yeah, well, very sly Catherine Keener. Oh, yeah, sure. We're going to keep up this pretend, this charade long enough. And look at Jeremy there. His banjo or ukulele and he turns around, and it's funny, but it's very sinister. We know what's happening here, and the jig is up. It really is. Isolation again for Chris, and he's sending that photo that you see off to Rod, and Rod's going to come right back with, I think, a very funny rejoinder. So it's something that is very interesting. Now we're seeing that Rod has told Chris that this guy that he saw in that photo that was just sent is actually Andre Hayworth, the guy who actually was put in the sleeper hold at the beginning of the movie, who was wandering through the neighborhood by himself. That's the same guy. Oh, now we've got Rose again coming up. She looks a little different here. And she looks as if she knows something now. In her eyes, we see as if she is a step ahead, or she knows or is aware that Chris might become aware of what's going on. And so she looks a little bit nervous. And now, again, Chris is alone. The door is open. And you know what? In a horror movie, you're told not to go into these places with open doors. And particularly black characters are the first ones in horror movies to run the hell away from there. And it's usually the white character that will, oh, let me see what's going on in this really sinister place. And the black character is the one that says, no, I'm getting the hell out of here. And normally in horror movies, similarly though, the black character is usually the first to be killed off. And Chris, though, goes in here against horror movie type and goes through these photos of Rose, and then he begins to find the truth. And what you're going to see now is the lie that has been told. Rose has been lying all along about not ever dating a black man before Chris, and we clearly see in these photos that she's not just dated one black man before Chris, she's dated many black men before Chris. And look at what's going on here. And that photo there is a very familiar one. It's of Marcus Henderson, the groundskeeper. And we see the camera linger on it. And we see and look at this. We see she had a relationship also with Betty Gabriel's character, the housekeeper. Now he knows, oh shit, I am out of here. And boom, the horror reveal, the cut to the character that you're now afraid of is standing there with her legs arched like that, a step apart, in a very authoritative stance, as opposed to the more relaxed stance that she had throughout this movie. Now we see it. The characters are becoming much more clearly outlined. Look at the space here. Chris is in this narrow doorway space. The window behind him, he's framed up very closely. So now he's boxed in. And look at the way the doorway and the archway frame him now. The space that Chris has is incredibly closed off, and the camera shows it. The cinematography shows it. Boom, he stops. Boom. The angles are now much more sharp, and the space has now been cut off. All the space that Chris enjoyed, even in these big areas of this forest and in the house, he's now being closed off. And the camera shows that. He is cut off. Look, he's just framed up so closely now. The walls and the people are literally closing in on him. And Dean comes up there and asks these very bizarre questions about life and existence and all of this. And then spouts his white supremacist eugenics BS and bullshit and master race bullshit. And Chris wants to get the hell out of here now. And you can see that the true reveal of these people, the true nature of these people is being revealed. And Rose is having an awful lot of trouble trying to find these keys. And Chris knows now that there's no escape. And all of a sudden, Chris is just screaming at Rose, shouting at her, "Give me these damn keys, Rose." And now we've got Jeremy coming at Chris in a physical way, the way he did at the beginning around the dinner table when they had dinner. And look at this shot. Boom. Here she is. The true villain of the piece is Rose, upholding white supremacy and upholding white patriarchy. You know I can't let you have these keys, babe. And you know, that's to me, a very symbolic reference to the way black men are put in white America and how the access only goes so far. And you will see that this is the case. Yes, you can come to the house. Yes, you can even have me as your girlfriend, and you can have sex with me and have a relationship with me, but you will never get the keys to this kingdom. Because when push comes to shove, I am with the white patriarchs. I'm not with you. And that is something that is a very big cautionary tale, because I think it's very true in American society and white American society that there are some white women, I'd say a sizable amount of white women in the country, who, when push comes to shove, will stand with white patriarchy over what they know is right. And a great example of this, as I get political here for a moment, is the, I call him Donald. And you know who I'm talking about, who occupies the White House as of this moment in 2017. 53% of white women voted for him versus voting for Hillary Clinton. And so I think that that is part of this reveal here. Now, this movie was made before the presidential election. In fact, it was shot in under 30 days on a shoestring budget of between $1 and $3 million. But this idea of white women standing with white men for the primacy of the white race over standing for what is right has gone on for generations and centuries in America. And remember that there are white women who have caused a lot of damage to black men, a lot of damage, whether it's falsely accusing them of rape, whether it is any number of things. The Scottsboro Boys is a great example of this, a case from the early 1940s and 50s, 1930s, I believe, and 40s. Also, the Central Park Five is not that the victim in that case falsely accused black and Latino men. She didn't. She was unconscious. But it was this idea that white prosecutors, and a white woman prosecutor too, the lead prosecutor, had said that these young boys, teenage boys, had raped a white woman in the park, which of course they did not. And not only did they not rape her, it was somebody else that did, and they still spent years and years in prison for that. So there has been this history, and across the South and around the country, where in some instances white women have said that black men hurt them or raped them and didn't, or physically harmed them. Susan Smith, the case in the late 1980s, early 1990s in South Carolina, and you can look that up and Google it. She accused a black man with a ski mask had drowned her children, when in fact she herself, Susan Smith, drowned her kids in a lake. And that's a lexicon that's been used by white women and white men, blaming black men, saying it's black men, knowing that the racial history of the country and the racist history of America, knowing that many people would believe it, many white people and even some black people would believe this. Charles Stewart in Boston did this. So this is all around the country in the late 1980s. He actually killed his wife and shot himself and said that a black man had done this to them. And matter of fact, a black man didn't do it. And in the meantime, black men across Boston were searched throughout Boston, strip searched even as well, for days and days. It turned out, as I said, that Charles Stewart himself murdered his wife for insurance money, shot himself to make it look as if it was a crime committed by someone else. And then, if it wasn't for Charles Stewart's brother, we never would have known it. Charles Stewart's brother confessed on his behalf, and Charles Stewart himself committed suicide, jumping off the Bay Bridge, I believe it was, or the Back Bay Bridge in Boston. So there's been a long history of this. And even in 2017, a young white teenage woman, white teenager, she had accused 3 black men of attacking and raping her in Michigan, I believe it was. And it was found out to be false as well. So this is a legacy. What Rose has done here is a part of the legacy of what some white women and men have done to black men and black women, falsely accusing them of committing crimes. Emmett Till, the most notorious case of this, 1955, a white woman had said that Emmett Till had actually whistled at her, or smiled at her, or said something to her. These white men murdered him, tortured him and murdered him. Emmett Till is a teenager. He was probably about 11 or 12 years old, or 13 or whatever. He was a kid, and he was murdered. And only, I believe, late in 2016 or early 2017, the actual truth of it is that this woman, this white woman, confessed that she lied. And I think that she's in her 80s now, but I think she should be prosecuted for that, because she is every bit a murderer as those men were. I didn't mean to digress, but I think it's important to add some context to that scene with Rose with the keys. I think it's very important, so I did want to emphasize it. While I've been talking, you've seen the whole reveal now. This family is part of a cult. Behold the coagula, this coalescing of the human and the animal and the blood, and this the deer, and again this animal human connection. Again, we see it here with Rod and the dog that belongs to Chris. I love this scene because Erica Alexander here plays a police detective, and she's sitting here listening to the story that Rod, who's a TSA agent, is saying to her, is relaying to her. And in the background, you see a white woman and a white man in that background window. I find that interesting too, but on a completely unrelated level. And look at that profile shot of Erica Alexander. She's just been told that Chris has a white girlfriend, and you can tell she probably doesn't approve of that. And there's many people who don't approve of black men and white women being together. And some of those people can be black, some of those people are Latino, and a lot of them are white. And so this is something that still goes on in America. There's still a great opposition to black and white people marrying each other, and we see a little flicker of it here. And I think that Jordan Peele shows us her profile to suggest that she objects to it herself. I think that Lil Rel Howery is brilliant comic relief, but he's not just comic relief, he's a great friend to Chris. Rod is a great friend to Chris, a friend that you would really count on, someone that you can count on even more than perhaps the girlfriend or boyfriend that you have, or even the spouse that you have. It's just pure comic relief. It's pure stage for Rod to tell these detectives, who Erica Alexander has now enlisted to listen to this story. But many a truth spoken in jest, and as Rod's going through his theory about the sex slaves, and that a whole lot of brothers have been rounded up and been made sex slaves, and he's not far off. I mean, there's things like this that do happen in societies, in America, in secret societies, and it still happens. This is not far beyond any realm. We've seen this kind of behavior in the suburbs. It happens. There's some very strange things that go on, and of course, these guys they don't believe a word of it. It's absurd to them. Don't never say I don't do anything for you. And look, they're all absolutely belly aching at this. And those white girls will get you all the time. And so she has revealed how she feels about white women, that they are to be avoided, and that they are to be, you have to be wary of them. And I think that was the reveal there, you know. And I think that she laughs out of a sense of "I told you so," rather than out of a sense of ridicule of the story. So I found that to be interesting. So this movie now has become Rod's movie, and Lil Rel Howery here plays Rod, and he's the detective. He's the Columbo, if you will, now. And now we see the true Rose, White Rose, Lily White Rose, literally here. She looks whiter, actually, not just because of what she's wearing, but look at the way the light is on her, and her hair is so tightly pulled back. And she looks robotic and Stepford wife-ish. Again, that Stepford theme. Her eyes are widened. Her face is more pallid. And she is she's pretending that she sent Chris home by a taxi, and of course Rod is smart enough to see that this doesn't add up at all. And she's now going to try to play this, what I call white womanhood aspect angle on Rod and say, yeah, Rod, you really want me, don't you, Rod? You want to fuck me, don't you, Rod? And Rod's going to see through this, obviously. And, this is so funny. Yeah. Rod's a TSA agent, but you don't have to be a TSA agent to do what he's doing here. I'm going to tape you. And he's going to, because he knows that she's lying. And he can see right through it. And now he's going to try to get her to lie on tape. And of course, she doesn't know that she's being recorded. But he's gonna make this happen. And she puts the flower of Southern white womanhood on display here. And she's going to say, well, of course you want me, Rod. You want me, and the camera's going to swivel over to reveal the rest of the family members. You want me, Rod. You know you do. In the moment you saw me, you know that you want me. And he says, no, I'm the friend of the man that you're dating, but I've never been interested in you. And this idea that this particular white woman thinks that she is the best thing since sliced bread, and plays into issues where some white women do think that, because after all, white women who are blonde-haired, blue-eyed, who weigh about 95 pounds, and who are dressed very suggestively or not, are put on the covers of magazines all over the world, including all over the United States, and are seen in ads and posters and any number of places. And the message that's being reinforced over the decades and over the centuries is that this is the figure of desire that you must aspire to be with. And I think in some cases there are some black men who actually look at that and actually buy into it. A lot of black athletes and entertainers tend to marry white women. Not every one of them, but there is a truism to that. That there are a number of black athletes and celebrities and actors who marry white women, and there are all kinds of reasons for that. Some of them are more complex than they may seem, but that is something that you can't help but notice. And there's nothing wrong, again, with marrying someone of a different race. I just think the contextual aspect of this idea of trophyism, and I'm not saying that these marriages are trophy marriages, but one thing that black women have cited for a long time is that a lot of black men who make it big and who get to be rich and famous end up marrying someone who is white. And I think, again, there's this kind of idea of marrying up. I think for some of these men, they think they're marrying up. I guess subliminally. I don't know. But it is a topic that I think merits more discussion, and perhaps merits more discussion just beyond, I would say, beyond what I've just observed and cited as an observation as to what I think is interesting and fascinating. Here's Stephen Root. He's head shaved bald. He's explaining to Chris the procedure. Chris is just in dire straits now, and he's still in that sunken place, and he's now flashing back to all these moments as Stephen Root talks, and realizing that, yeah, he's now in this place where he can really face very dire straits. And it's a shame, because it's something that could really put Chris into more than a tailspin. And there's nothing more terrifying than sitting in this place knowing what's going to happen to you. And that's the epitome of horror, where you know what's going to happen to you and you're powerless to stop it. And we've seen this in a million movies, where you actually watch somebody die in front of you knowing that you're next. I remember this in films like Casino, and it's gone way before Martin Scorsese's movie, but in that movie where Joe Pesci watches his brother die, get beaten to death, and knowing that he's next, it creates an additional level of terror and horror. This line is interesting because Stephen Root says that he wants something deeper from Chris. I want those eyes, the things you see through, and for him, he claims it's not about race. It's about really getting to the core of what I want. And I think it is about race for Stephen Root's character, Jim. But I also do agree with him that he wants to have a different perspective. He really wants to see life through Chris's eyes. But I do think he does want to be inhabiting a black man's body because he wants this physical, what he perceives as physical strength and longevity. And I think it's very interesting because when you look at the way we behave now, we have women, white women, getting enlargements to their butts, getting enlargements to their lips. For decades we've had white women, like as done with Bo Derek in the movie 10, doing braids. All of these very African-centered, Afrocentric types of things that are attributes to some black women. And we see white people suntanning, trying to get darker. On these levels, these are all levels of wanting to be a little darker, wanting to be black, if you will. And I don't think you will get many white people who would admit that. I once had a white person say to me, I wish I was black. I wish I was dark like you. And that was a white woman who was in her late 30s at the time, who once told me that. And I was a kid at the time. And it was an eye-opening experience. I was old enough to understand. So there are people like this who literally want to be black. And the styles, the cultural mores, the styles that go through society, I think reflect a lot of that. White people emulating, or in some cases, in a number of cases, appropriating black cultural styles or urban styles, if you will. And we've just seen some very graphic dismemberments of heads and skulls, and we see that this brain transfer operation is coming. And we've seen that brain transfer operation has happened to Georgina, has happened to Walter, has happened to Lakeith Stanfield's character. And the most grisly parts of the movie are in effect now, as we see the full-blown horror coming. Now, we're about to see the first time in the movie that Chris gets physical, because over most of the movie it's been very intellectual and emotional. We see that deer again in the background, but now Chris is about to get physical, and it's time to rise up and defend yourself, and Chris does just that. And now we see that Chris is, and notice the way he conducts the violence. He stops for a bit. He looks. He doesn't just commit the violent act and move on like you see in most action movies. There's a sense of thought and regard. I don't want to say regret, but he's contemplating. So he's still very much in a thought mode. He's not autopiloting any of this. And here we see nice look. The brain transplanting. Yuck. And Dean is wondering where Jeremy is and why he isn't back yet. And we'll find out. We'll realize very shortly why he's not back yet. I thought that this was very symbolic. The deer. And remember, Bradley Whitford says, one deer down, 100,000 more to go. I don't like these deer. They should get rid of them. And of course, he's symbolically talking about black men, black people. And I said this merger between animal and human and the landscape in which they reside. And it was symbolic that the deer strikes back. This idea that Chris would get that off the wall and strike a death blow for the deer. And you see those deer behind him too. It's very interesting stuff. Georgina has run away, and oh, here we go. Now, Missy does not have that cup, that bit of power that she has to hypnotize. And so now it's Chris and Missy. And look at the way Chris and Missy just look at each other. Boom. She grabs a letter opener, and she stabbed that right through his hand, right through the middle of his hand. And Chris now doesn't even feel that pain. And watch what he does. He is able to turn this around and boom, has driven that presumably right through her eye socket. And if this is one of those kinds of horror movies where you saw everything, you would see that. And as we know in horror movies, the dead aren't quite dead. And we thought that Jeremy was out for the count. But of course, like any true horror movie, he's not. He's not. Not yet, anyway. And he's here putting that chokehold on again, the way he did on Lakeith Stanfield, and very similar to what, of course, Rose had done in a very, I guess, quote-unquote, comforting way to Chris. And Chris now is relying on every bit of his strength to do what he's about to do here. And now he's going to finish the job on Jeremy, who deserves this. And we see, again, most of this violence is actually off camera, but we see that Chris is taking the right approach here. He's got to kill these people to get out of there. And it's absolutely plausible and makes every bit of sense in the world. And by now, audiences, at least most of the audiences I've seen this with, are cheering and are very happy to see Jeremy get his and that Chris is dispensing it. And now a light-hearted moment to balance off of the intense violence we've just been watching. Rose is now looking like a 1950s white girl, except with the late 20th and early 21st century technology. And Jennifer Warnes and Bill Medley, I've had the time of my life, is in the background. And look at these pictures behind her of all the black men she's dated, this wall of fame of these black men that she's dated. And she's looking on a computer for NCAA basketball prospects. One of the pictures you will see is of Keegan Michael Key, who actually is one half of the Key and Peele comedy duo. Jordan Peele is the other half of that on the network Comedy Central. And we'll see that here if we haven't already. So now Chris is in the very car that we saw at the beginning, the one that Jeremy was driving. And Jeremy, of course, is long gone now, dead. And Chris looked at that helmet, that kind of knight's helmet. And, of course, Chris's past is still with him, as it is with all of us, our past, our present. And now he has a flashback to his own mother, and he wants to try to redeem himself, so he brings the woman he's just run over, Georgina, into the car. And here's Annie Oakley. And she's now doing this. She's now trying to effectuate a capture of Chris. And Chris is now the one who's driving the car. And look at this, you ruined my house. And now we know that this isn't really Georgina talking. It's Rose's grandmother talking, because Rose's grandmother's brain is inside this black woman's body. And you see that opening across the top of her head there. Chris is, boom, that was a moment that made me jump. That gunfire that hits the mirror, the side mirror of the car. And that car is obviously totaled, and Chris now has to stagger for his life. And here's his girlfriend. The woman who he confided in is now turned against him. Get him, Grandpa. We obviously know now for sure that is Walter running, but he of course has the brain of Rose's grandfather in him. And they are fighting to the death here. And you see what's going on there. And you see the cell phone camera coming out again. Boom. And it's a really good device because it works. Walter gets up and staggers, and really smart here. Watch what happens. Let me do it. And of course, he shoots Rose right through her stomach and abdomen, and strikes a blow against this murderous white family, terroristic white family, and then he ends his own life. It's striking a blow against an aspect of white supremacy in a way, and he's also striking a blow against the brain that's put within him. And this technology woke him up and to doing that. So he's saving himself by killing himself. And Rose is gasping her last breaths, and she's still trying to finish the job. Chris is not going to have it. He's not going to have any of it. And he's going to put paid to Rose right now, the woman that he loved. And even as he's killing her, he's telling her that he loves her. And this is about, you only hurt the ones you love. You only kill the ones you love. You only hurt the ones you love. Well, this is the prime example of that. And I actually believe in this moment. I believe that even after everything that's happened, that they two still do. They both genuinely love each other. But the complications of race in a racist society, which is actually not that complicated at all, have now taken over. And it supersedes any imaginary need to love, and Chris can't quite finish the job here. She's still alive here, Rose, and he still loves her, and we see that she loves him. You can see it in their eyes, in their faces. And now she's going to use the ploy that some white people do use. Help, help. She knows that these cops, mostly white cops, are going to be helpful to her against this black man. We all know in America, white and black alike and others alike, that police are going to be much more favorable to anybody white than they are black. They're liable to kill Chris, and they would kill Chris. But this police officer is a TSA officer, and it's Rod here, Chris's best friend. He's come to save the day, and he does save the day. And now there's no way back for Rose. She's going to expire right here, right now. And that will be the end of her. This moment is just classic. I love it. It's the best moment of the movie for me, for Lil Rel Howery. I mean, I told you not to go in that house. Come on now. I mean, that's just great comic timing, great delivery of the line. Chris is in a state of shock, and he's tranced out here. Another great line. These are the kinds of lines that should be getting a lot more play. Because Clint Eastwood gets play all the time with the lines from Dirty Harry. With all those Dirty Harry movies, right? Go ahead and make my day. There's a million movies where there's a line that an actor speaks that gets all of this play. It becomes iconic. Godfather, make you an offer you can't refuse. I think a line like this, I'm T.S. motherfucking A. Consider this situation fucking handled. I mean, those are lines that I think should go right up there. I don't see why not. And we don't think of these things as the same. And I think, again, there's a racial element to that too, a racist element to that. I really think so. It's interesting. Rose is dead. Walter is dead. This whole family is dead and hopefully never to ever return. But are there other families like this in the world? I'm not saying that they do these kinds of things, but there are people on the planet Earth who do very nasty, evil things to people, regardless of race, but particularly in this instance, due to racist feelings and ideas. We've had this happen in the United States in 2017 and all over the world, but I'm thinking particularly of what happened in Portland, and I'm recording this commentary in, as I say, the middle of 2017, and we had this attack in Portland with a white man doing these awful things, actually killing two white men who tried to save these two black women. Anyway, I want to say about these credits, by the way, that early in these credits that are ending, you notice there was no differentiation between left and right, so you thought that these people could all be real. And I thought that was a very good touch by the end credits folks and the director. Now we clearly see that these are people who played a part in the movie, people who are production assistants and consultants and coordinators, and there's always hundreds of people who are involved in movies behind the scenes, in front of and behind the camera. And it is a real testament to all of the people that you see here crawling up the screen, that they got all this done in under 30 days. Under 30 days. With a budget of under $3 million. And to produce the level of art and quality that they have done, I think is nothing short of remarkable. And that millions of people around the world saw this movie when it was in theaters, and it's still in some theaters as of this part of 2017. It's still in theaters in various parts of the world, in the UK and elsewhere, and in even parts of the United States. And it is now on DVD and Blu-ray, which is where I'm watching this and commenting on it now for you. It should be pointed out that Jordan Peele has done a commentary on this film as well. You should listen to that. My commentary is not related to that. It's a commentary from my opinions and what I saw from this movie that may be different from what Jordan Peele sees and what he may have intended. Art is such a beautiful thing because there's a billion perspectives. No one's is wrong. However, you may disagree with one's perspective. It's a perspective that exists and it is valid. And everybody wants this one perspective, and that's the definitive. And the director's perspective is not definitive, because once he or she releases that, it's your perspective now, and you have your own personal view of what you think the events are about and what they mean to you. And I've just spent the last hour and 44 minutes giving you mine, and I want to thank you for listening and indulging me and the cold that I have, talking about this excellent film Get Out, which made close to $200 million in the US and Canada and millions more around the world. So thank you very much. This is an excellent film. I am Omar Moore, and I hope you enjoyed the commentary.